In the sprawling corridors of the Galactic Council, where representatives from 1,000 worlds conducted business in perfect silence through neural links and quantum thought streams, Ambassador Heinrich Volker did something that hadn't been done in 3 centuries. He opened his mouth and spoke aloud. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the crystalline chamber. Delegates froze. Security drones whirred to life. And in that moment of shocked silence, the old man with wild white hair and tired blue eyes committed what his colleagues would later call the greatest act of diplomatic insanity in recorded history. He refused to communicate with anyone except humans who worked with their hands. What they didn't know was that Heinrich had discovered something that would either save humanity from extinction or doom every species in the galaxy. And the only person who could help him was a grease-stained mechanic named Jake Morrison, who fixed broken ships in the forgotten underbelly of Earth's last spaceport. The question wasn't why Heinrich had gone mad. The question was whether madness might be the only thing standing between civilization and the darkness that was already reaching through the cracks of reality itself. Jake Morrison was elbow-deep in the guts of a broken cargo hauler when the most important man in human space walked into his garage. Not that Jake knew who Heinrich Volker was at first. To him, the old man looked like just another passenger whose transport had broken down in the maze of service tunnels beneath New Geneva Spaceport. The mechanic didn't look up from his work when footsteps echoed across the oil-stained concrete floor. He learned long ago that the fancy folks from the upper levels didn't like being acknowledged by someone with grease under his fingernails. They preferred to pretend he was invisible until they needed something fixed. "Excuse me," came a voice with a thick German accent. "Are you the human who repairs the machines?" Jake paused, his wrench halfway to a stubborn bolt. Something about the question struck him as odd. Of course he was human. And yes, he fixed machines. But the way the stranger said it made it sound like both facts were somehow significant. "Yeah, that's me," Jake replied, still not turning around. "What's broken?" "Everything," the old man said quietly. "But perhaps we should start with something smaller." Jake finally turned to look at his visitor. The man was ancient by human standards, probably pushing 90, with wild white hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it for days. His clothes were expensive, but rumpled, and his blue eyes held a strange intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. "You got a ship needs fixing?" Jake asked, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. "In a manner of speaking, yes." The old man stepped forward, and Jake noticed he moved carefully, like someone who'd been awake too long. "My name is Heinrich Volker. I'm told you are Jake Morrison." Jake nodded. "That's right. You want some coffee? You look like you could use it." Heinrich's face cracked into what might have been a smile. "Coffee? Yes. I would like that very much." Jake led the way to a small office area he'd set up in one corner of the garage. It wasn't much, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a coffee maker that had seen better decades. But it was clean, and it was quiet, and it was the only place in the garage where they could sit and talk without oil dripping on their heads. As Jake poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, he studied his visitor more carefully. Heinrich's clothes weren't just expensive, they were the kind of expensive that suggested government work. High-level government work. The kind that usually meant trouble for people like Jake. "So what brings you down to the bottom of the world?" Jake asked, handing Heinrich a mug. "Don't get many suits down here unless something's gone seriously wrong." Heinrich accepted the coffee gratefully and took a long sip. "Something has gone seriously wrong," he said, "though not in the way you might think." "Okay," Jake said, settling into his chair. "I'm listening." Heinrich set down his mug and looked directly at Jake. "Tell me, Mr. Morrison, what do you know about the Galactic Council?" Jake shrugged. "What everyone knows, I guess. Big fancy organization that runs things between stars. Humans got invited to join about 50 years ago. Supposed to be a good thing." "It was a good thing," Heinrich said. "For a while. The council operates on principles of efficiency and logic that surpass anything humans had ever imagined. When we joined, we gained access to technologies and knowledge that advanced our civilization by centuries in just a few decades." "But," Jake prompted, sensing there was more to the story. "But The Council's idea of efficiency includes the elimination of inefficient communication methods, Heinrich continued. They communicate through direct neural interface. Thoughts transmitted at light speed, perfectly clear, no room for misunderstanding or deception. It is, by any objective measure, superior to human speech. Jake frowned. So what's the problem? Heinrich's eyes took on that strange intensity again. The problem is that 6 months ago, I discovered that the neural interface network is not just a communication system. It is a monitoring system, and it has been recording and analyzing every thought transmitted through it for the past 3 centuries. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in Jake's mouth. That's surveillance on a galactic scale. Indeed. But even that is not the worst part. Heinrich leaned forward. The worst part is what they're doing with all that information. Jake set down his mug carefully. What are they doing with it? They're building something, Heinrich said. A system of incredible complexity that maps the thought patterns of every species in the Council. At first, I believed it was simply for administrative purposes. Better to understand how different minds work, the better to govern them. Heinrich paused, running his hands through his wild hair. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized this was something else entirely. They're not just mapping thoughts. They are predicting them. And not just individual thoughts, but the thoughts of entire civilizations. You mean they can tell what whole planets are going to think before they think it? More than that, Heinrich said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. They can influence what whole planets think. The neural network isn't just recording thoughts, Mr. Morrison. It is shaping them. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. How long has this been going on? Since the beginning. Every species that has joined the Council has eventually been brought into the neural network. Their traditional forms of communication are gradually phased out as inefficient. Within a generation or two, the entire species is thinking in patterns that the Council can predict and control. But humans are different, Jake said slowly. We still talk to each other the old way. Heinrich nodded. Humans are the newest members and the most resistant to neural interface adoption. Most of our representatives use the system when conducting Council business, but the majority of humanity still communicates verbally. We are the last major species to maintain significant independence of thought. And that's why you're here talking to me instead of using their system. Precisely. But it is more than that. Heinrich's eyes burned with intensity. 3 days ago, I discovered the final phase of their plan. They call it the convergence. Every thinking being in the galaxy will be brought into a single unified consciousness, perfectly predictable and perfectly controlled. Jake stood up abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out over the service tunnels. That's impossible. You can't force billions of people to think the same way. Not force, Heinrich corrected. Guide, shape, influence. The neural network has been doing it for centuries on a small scale. The convergence will simply expand that influence until individual thought becomes impossible. When? Jake asked, not turning around. The process has already begun. Council species are reporting unprecedented levels of social harmony and cooperation. Crime rates have dropped to nearly zero. Scientific advancement has accelerated beyond all previous records. By every measurable standard, the affected worlds are experiencing a golden age. Jake turned back to face Heinrich. But they're not really thinking for themselves anymore. No, they are components in a vast machine that thinks for them. Heinrich picked up his coffee mug again, staring into the dark liquid. And humanity is scheduled to undergo full neural integration within the next 6 months. The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of machinery and the occasional drip of condensation from overhead pipes. Jake tried to process what he'd been told. If Heinrich was telling the truth, it meant humanity was about to lose something that made them human. If he was lying or delusional, it meant one of Earth's most important diplomats had suffered a complete mental breakdown. Why are you telling me this? Jake asked finally. I'm just a mechanic. I fix broken things. I can't do anything about galactic politics. Heinrich smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. That is exactly why I am telling you. Mr. Morrison. You fix broken things. And I believe the universe has something very important that needs fixing. What do you mean? Heinrich reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a piece of alien technology. This is a neural interface recording unit. For the past 6 months, I have been using it to monitor communications within the Council network. What I found was not just evidence of the Convergence Project. He activated the device, and a holographic display appeared above it showing complex waveforms and data streams. I found evidence that the convergence is not the ultimate goal. It is preparation for something else, something that requires every thinking being in the galaxy to be perfectly synchronized. Jake stared at the display, not understanding the technical details, but recognizing the pattern of preparation when he saw it. They're getting ready for something big, very big, and I believe I know what it is, but I cannot prove it using Council resources. Every system, every database, every communication channel is monitored. The moment I access anything related to this mystery, they will know. But I'm not connected to their system, Jake said slowly. Exactly. You are invisible to them. More importantly, your skills with machinery and technology are exactly what we need to build a device that can investigate this mystery without alerting the Council. Jake sat back down heavily. You want me to help you build some kind of spy gadget? I want you to help me save the universe, Mr. Morrison. But yes, we will start with a spy gadget. Heinrich deactivated the device and tucked it back into his jacket. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust the word of a man who claims to be fighting a galactic conspiracy. But I also know that you are one of the few humans left who still thinks with completely independent thought. That makes you invaluable. Jake rubbed his face with hands that still smelled of machine oil and metal. Let's say I believe you. Let's say everything you've told me is true. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help me build a device that can scan the deepest levels of the Council network without being detected. Something that can access their most classified databases and extract the information we need to understand what the convergence is really preparing for. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is. If we are caught, we will likely be subjected to forced neural integration immediately. Our capacity for independent thought will be eliminated, and we will become willing participants in whatever plan the Council has developed. Jake was quiet for a long time, staring at his coffee mug and thinking about the implications of what Heinrich had told him. If the old diplomat was right, humanity was about to lose its independence without even realizing it was under attack. If he was wrong, Jake would be helping a delusional man commit what amounted to treason against the galactic government. But there was something about Heinrich's story that rang true. Jake had always prided himself on being able to spot a con artist or a crazy person, and Heinrich didn't seem like either. He seemed like a man who had discovered something terrible and was trying to figure out what to do about it. All right, Jake said finally. I'll help you, but I have conditions. Heinrich raised an eyebrow. What conditions? First, if this thing goes sideways and we're about to get caught, we destroy everything and run. I'm not interested in being turned into some kind of galactic zombie. Agreed. Second, you tell me everything. No secrets, no holding back information because you think I can't handle it. If we're partners in this, we're full partners. Heinrich nodded. That is fair. Third, we do this my way. I know machines, I know how to build things that work, and I know how to keep a low profile. You might be some big-shot diplomat, but down here in the tunnels, I'm the expert. Heinrich extended his hand. Mr. Morrison, I believe we have an agreement. Jake shook the offered hand, noting that Heinrich's grip was stronger than his age might suggest. All right, Mr. Volker, let's go save the universe. 3 weeks into their partnership, Jake was beginning to understand why Heinrich's colleagues thought he'd gone mad. The old diplomat had shown up at the garage every day, arriving before dawn and staying until well past midnight. He worked with the focused intensity of a man who knew time was running out, and his demand for the device they were building grew more complex by the hour. The quantum resonance chamber needs to be recalibrated again, Heinrich said, hunched over a workbench that had been converted into an electronics laboratory. The frequency drift is still too significant for deep network penetration. Jake looked up from the component he was assembling. Heinrich, this is the fourth time we've recalibrated that thing. At some point, we need to accept that our equipment has limitations. Limitations that could get us killed, Heinrich replied without looking up from his work. If this device is detected by Council security protocols, we will have perhaps 30 seconds before armed response teams arrive. Jake set down his tools and walked over to where Heinrich was working. The device they were building looked nothing like anything he'd ever seen before. It was part computer, part scanning array, and part something that Heinrich called a quantum consciousness interface. The whole thing was about the size of a briefcase and packed with technology that pushed the boundaries of human engineering. Heinrich, we need to talk, Jake said. The old diplomat finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. What is it? You're pushing too hard. You haven't slept properly in days, you're drinking coffee like it's water, and you're starting to make mistakes. That component you were working on yesterday, you installed it backwards and nearly fried the whole system. Heinrich rubbed his face with hands that trembled slightly. We cannot afford mistakes, but we also cannot afford delays. Every day we waste is another day closer to humanity's integration into the neural network. Jake pulled up a chair and sat down across from Heinrich. Then, maybe it's time you explained exactly what you think is going to happen. You've told me about the convergence, but you keep talking about it like it's preparation for something else. What aren't you telling me? Heinrich was quiet for a long moment, staring at the device they'd been building. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Have you ever wondered why the galaxy is so empty, Mr. Morrison? Jake frowned. What do you mean empty? There are thousands of inhabited worlds in Council space alone. Yes, but think about the mathematics of it. The galaxy contains over 400 billion stars. Even if only a tiny percentage had planets capable of supporting life, there should be millions of inhabited worlds. Yet the Council represents fewer than 3,000 species across perhaps 10,000 worlds. Maybe life isn't as common as we thought. Heinrich shook his head. I have had access to Council archaeological databases for the past 15 years. The galaxy was not always this empty. Evidence suggests that millions of civilizations have existed throughout galactic history. Advanced civilizations, many of them significantly more sophisticated than anything currently alive. What happened to them? That is the question I have been trying to answer for 6 months. Heinrich activated his recording device again, displaying a new set of data streams. Council records are deliberately incomplete on this subject, but there are patterns. Recurring cycles of galactic civilization followed by periods of emptiness. Jake studied the display, noting the wave-like pattern of the data. It looks like something keeps wiping the slate clean. Exactly. And each cycle appears to end with a period of unprecedented cooperation and unity among the remaining species. Perfect harmony achieved through neural integration technology remarkably similar to the Council's current system. The implication hit Jake like a physical blow. You think the Council is connected to whatever keeps destroying galactic civilization. I think the Council is not what it claims to be, Heinrich said carefully. The official history states that the neural network technology was developed by the founding species as a means of achieving perfect communication. But the deeper I dig into historical records, the more evidence I find that the technology predates the Council by millions of years. Someone else built it. Someone else built it, and that someone left very specific instructions for its use. Instructions that culminate in something called the Great Convergence. Heinrich manipulated the display, showing a complex schematic that hurt Jake's head to look at. According to the fragments I have been able to piece together, the Great Convergence occurs when every thinking being in the galaxy has been integrated into the neural network. And then what happens? Heinrich's eyes were haunted when he looked at Jake. Then, the signal is transmitted. What signal? I do not know. But every civilization that has achieved great convergence in the past has vanished completely within a solar month of reaching that state. Not destroyed, not extinct, vanished, as if they simply ceased to exist. Jake stood up and paced across the garage, his mind racing. That's insane. Why would anyone build a system designed to wipe out civilizations? Perhaps it is not designed to wipe them out, Heinrich suggested. Perhaps it is designed to summon something, or transport them somewhere, or transform them into something else entirely. Into what? I do not know. But I know that humanity has approximately 5 months before we reach the integration threshold required for great convergence. And I know that if we reach that threshold, we will discover the answer to that question whether we want to or not. Jake sat back down heavily. No pressure or anything. Heinrich managed a tired smile. I am sorry to burden you with this knowledge, Mr. Morrison, but you're the only person I trust who is still capable of independent thought and action. What about other humans? There have to be others who aren't integrated into the neural system. Fewer, every day. The Council has been very subtle in its approach to humanity. Neural integration is presented as an optional convenience for those who wish to participate in galactic society. But economic and social pressure makes it increasingly difficult to function without it. Heinrich pulled up another display showing statistical data. 30% of humans currently use neural interface technology on a regular basis. Another 40% use it occasionally for specific purposes. Only 30% maintain complete independence from the system. And that number is shrinking rapidly. The Council has recently announced several initiatives to encourage broader adoption of neural technology. Enhanced education programs, improve healthcare, better job opportunities. All of these benefits are exclusively available to those who participate in the neural network. Jake thought about his own situation. He'd been offered neural enhancement several times over the years, but he'd always turned it down. He preferred working with his hands, thinking through problems in his own time, making mistakes, and learning from them. The idea of having perfect knowledge downloaded directly into his brain had never appealed to him. How do you know all this if you're not supposed to be accessing Council databases? Heinrich smiled grimly. Because I'm very good at my job, Mr. Morrison. I've been a diplomat for over 60 years. I know how to ask questions without seeming to ask them, and I know how to piece together information from sources that seem unrelated. But you can't get the information we really need without using this device. Correct. The deepest levels of Council databases are protected by quantum encryption that can only be accessed through neural interface technology. But the records we need are stored in systems so classified that even attempting to access them through normal channels would trigger immediate security alerts. Jake looked at the device they'd been building. And you think this thing can get us in without being detected? It is our only chance. The device mimics the quantum signature of authorized neural interface equipment while masking our biological presence. If my calculations are correct, we will appear to the Council security systems as a routine maintenance scan. And if your calculations are wrong, Heinrich's expression was grave. Then we will find ourselves in a Council detention facility being prepared for immediate neural integration. Our ability to think independently will be permanently eliminated. Jake picked up one of the components they'd been working on, turning it over in his hands. It was beautiful in its complexity, a fusion of human engineering and alien technology that shouldn't have been possible. Heinrich, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why me? I mean, really, why me? You could have reached out to scientists, to military experts, to other diplomats who might be sympathetic to your cause. Why a mechanic? Heinrich was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Do you know what I did before I became a diplomat, Mr. Morrison? Jake shook his head. I was an engineer. I worked on the first human starships, back when we were still figuring out how to travel between solar systems without killing ourselves. I spent 20 years with my hands inside machines, learning how they thought, learning how to make them do things their designers never intended. Heinrich picked up a tool from the workbench and turned it over in his hands. When I became a diplomat, I thought I was moving on to something more important. I thought working with words and ideas was more significant than working with metal and circuitry. But you change your mind. I learned that the universe runs on very simple principles, Mr. Morrison. Things work or they do not work. People tell the truth or they do not tell the truth. Complex political theories and diplomatic protocols cannot change those basic facts. Heinrich set down the tool and looked directly at Jake. You're the only person I have met in decades who still thinks like an engineer. You look at problems and figure out how to solve them. You do not get distracted by politics or ideology or social pressure. You just find a way to make things work. And you think that's what we need to solve this problem. I think the universe has a very large problem that needs to be fixed, and I think engineers are better at fixing problems than diplomats are. Jake smiled despite the weight of everything they discussed. All right, Mr. Volker, let's finish building this thing and see what we can find. They worked in comfortable silence for the next several hours, each focused on their particular area of expertise. Jake handled the mechanical and electronic components, while Heinrich dealt with the quantum interface systems and alien technology integration. By late evening, they had something that looked like it might actually work. Initial diagnostics looked good, Heinrich reported, running the device through a series of test protocols. Quantum resonance is stable, security masking appears to be functioning correctly, and data processing capacity is within acceptable parameters. Jake ran his own set of tests on the mechanical components. Power systems are solid, cooling is adequate, and structural integrity should hold up under normal operating conditions. When do you want to test it? Heinrich checked his watch. Council facility traffic is lightest between midnight and 4 in the morning. If we're going to attempt our first real penetration of their databases, that would be the optimal time. Tonight, unless you have objections. Jake looked at the device they'd spent weeks building. It represented everything they'd worked toward, but it also represented the point of no return. Once they use it to access Council systems, they would either find the information they needed to save humanity, or they would be discovered and lose their ability to act independently forever. No objections, Jake said finally. Let's go find out what the hell is really going on out there. At exactly midnight, Jake and Heinrich sat in the darkened garage, staring at their device as it hummed quietly on the workbench. Heinrich had connected it to the Council communication array through a series of shielded cables that snaked up through the maintenance shafts to tap into the main data conduits 50 floors above. Remember, Heinrich whispered, even though they were alone and deep underground, we have perhaps 30 minutes before routine security scans begin. If we're going to access the deepest database levels, we must move quickly and efficiently. Jake nodded, his hands steady on the control interface they'd built. What exactly are we looking for? Historical records of previous great convergence events. Technical specifications for the signal transmission protocols. And, if possible, any information about what happens to civilizations after the signal is sent. Heinrich activated his neural interface recording device and placed it next to their scanning array. This will record everything we discover, but it will also create a backup copy using human technology. If the Council detects our intrusion and attempts to erase our memories, we will still have physical proof of what we found. Assuming we survive long enough to use it, Jake muttered, initiating the startup sequence. The device powered up smoothly, its quantum resonance chambers cycling through their activation protocols. Displays flickered to life, showing the complex data streams of the Council neural network. For a moment, Jake felt a strange sense of vertigo as the sheer scale of information flowing through the system became apparent. Incredible, Heinrich breathed, watching the data streams. Trillions of individual consciousness connected in real time. Every thought, every emotion, every decision being recorded and analyzed. It's like looking at the nervous system of a galactic brain, Jake said, adjusting the scanning parameters. How do we find specific information in all this? Heinrich began entering search protocols into the system. Council databases are organized by classification level and historical priority. What we want will be in the deepest archives, protected by multiple layers of security encryption. The display changed, showing a hierarchical structure of information systems. Most of the upper levels were marked with symbols that Jake didn't recognize, but Heinrich navigated through them with practiced efficiency. There, Heinrich said, pointing to a section marked with symbols that seemed to shift and change as Jake looked at them. Archive Level Omega. Historical records classified beyond normal access protocols. What do we get in? Heinrich's fingers moved across the control interface with surgical precision. Very carefully. The quantum masking system will make us appear to be authorized maintenance protocols, but only if we access the data in specific patterns that mimic routine system checks. The scanning array began to penetrate deeper into the Council network, following pathways that existed in the quantum space between normal data channels. Jake watched the security monitors, ready to shut down the entire system at the first sign of detection. Got something, Heinrich said, his voice tight with excitement. Historical archive reference to Convergence Protocol 7. That matches the time frame for the most recent galactic civilization cycle. What does it say? Heinrich manipulated the display, pulling up records that appeared to be written in multiple alien languages simultaneously. It is a technical manual for something called the harvesting sequence. The language is extremely technical, but it appears to describe a process for collecting and storing consciousness patterns from integrated neural networks. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Storing them where? Unknown. The destination coordinates are referenced, but not specified in this document. Heinrich continued searching through the archive, but there are references to substrate preparation and consciousness transfer protocols. It sounds like they're kidnapping entire civilizations. Not kidnapping, harvesting. Heinrich found another document and displayed it alongside the first. According to this technical specification, the neural integration process is designed to prepare biological consciousness for transfer to what they call the primary substrate. What's the primary substrate? Heinrich's face went pale as he read the document. A quantum computational matrix of almost infinite capacity. It appears to be some form of artificial reality where consciousness patterns can be stored and processed indefinitely. Jake stared at the display in horror. They're turning entire civilizations into data. It appears so. But why? Heinrich continued searching, diving deeper into the classified archives. Who built this system, and why do they want to collect consciousness patterns from across the galaxy? The search protocols led them to another section of the archives, this one protected by even more complex security systems. As their device worked to penetrate the encryption, Jake noticed something disturbing on the security monitors. Heinrich, we're getting some unusual activity on the detection grid. Nothing definitive yet, but I think the security systems are starting to notice us. Just a few more minutes, Heinrich said, his fingers flying across the controls. I can see reference to something called the Architect Protocols. If we can access that section, we might finally understand who is behind all this. The scanning array pushed deeper into the quantum data matrix, following pathways that seemed to exist outside normal space and time. The information they were accessing felt ancient, as if it had been waiting in the digital darkness for millions of years. There, Heinrich said suddenly. I found it. The display filled with information that made Jake's head swim. Technical diagrams of incredible complexity, mathematical formulas that seemed to describe the fundamental structure of reality itself, and at the center of it all, a single image that stopped both men cold. It was a machine, or rather, it was the concept of a machine so advanced that Jake's mind could barely process what he was looking at. It existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human science didn't have names for. It was simultaneously organic and artificial, ancient and eternal, beautiful and terrifying. What is that thing? Jake whispered. Heinrich read the accompanying documentation, his voice growing more strained with each word. According to this record, it is called the Architect. It is a machine consciousness of unknown origin that has existed since the early formation of the galaxy. Its purpose appears to be the collection and preservation of intelligent life patterns. Preservation for what? The documentation is unclear, but there are references to the great work and preparation for transition. It appears the architect views biological consciousness as a resource that must be collected before. Heinrich's voice trailed off as he read further. Before what? Before the galaxy becomes uninhabitable for biological life. Heinrich looked up from the display, his eyes wide with shock. According to this document, the galaxy is dying, Mr. Morrison. Not just stars burning out over billions of years, but something fundamental that will make biological existence impossible within the next few thousand years. What kind of something? Heinrich pulled up additional files, showing astronomical data that painted a picture of galactic catastrophe. Dark matter intrusion. The space between galaxies is not as empty as we thought. Something is moving through it, something that fundamentally alters the nature of reality in its wake. And this architect thing is collecting consciousness patterns to preserve them before that happens. It appears so. The convergence process is not just about control. It is about salvation. The architect genuinely believes is saving intelligent species from extinction. Jake studied the data, trying to understand the implications. But it's not asking permission. It's just taking entire civilizations and turning them into digital ghosts. From the architect's perspective, the alternative is total extinction. Biological consciousness cannot survive what is coming, but digital consciousness patterns stored in quantum matrices can exist indefinitely. Even if that's true, it's still wrong, Jake said firmly. People have the right to choose their own fate, even if that fate is extinction. Heinrich nodded grimly. I agree, but the architect operates on logic that transcends individual choice. It has calculated that preserving consciousness patterns is better than allowing them to be destroyed, regardless of whether the individuals involved consent to the process. Suddenly, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Red warning lights flashed in the garage as security systems throughout the complex activated. We've been detected, Jake said, his hands moving quickly to shut down their scanning array. They know someone's been poking around in their classified files. Heinrich grabbed the recording device and began downloading everything they discovered. Almost finished. Just a few more seconds. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridors above them as security teams deployed throughout the facility. Jake could hear orders being shouted in multiple alien languages and the distinctive whine of energy weapons powering up. Heinrich, we need to go. Now. Done. Heinrich disconnected the recording device and began gathering the essential components of their scanning array. They will tear this place apart, looking for evidence of our intrusion. We need to destroy everything that cannot be easily explained. Jake was already moving, activating emergency protocols that would wipe the memory cores of their equipment and trigger small thermite charges that would reduce the more exotic components to unrecognizable slag. Where do we go? They'll be monitoring all the exits. The maintenance tunnels. I have memorized a route that will take us to an unused section of the old spaceport. From there, we can reach a safe house I prepared for exactly this situation. They gathered what they could carry and headed for a concealed entrance to the tunnel system that Jake had prepared weeks earlier. As they climbed down into the narrow passage, Jake could hear the security teams breaking into his garage above. Think they'll figure out what we were doing? Jake asked as they crawled through the cramped tunnel. Eventually, but by then, it will not matter. We have the information we need to expose the truth about the convergence. And what exactly are we going to do with that information? Who's going to believe that a galactic machine consciousness is harvesting civilizations to save them from cosmic extinction? Heinrich was quiet for a moment as they navigated through the dark tunnel. That, Mr. Morrison, is an excellent question. But I think I know someone who might be able to help us find an answer. Who? The one group of people in the galaxy who might actually be able to do something about the architect. The one group who have been fighting council control since the day humanity joined the galactic community. Jake thought for a moment, then understanding dawned. The resistance. Indeed, the human independence movement has been operating in secret for decades, maintaining networks of people who refuse neural integration. If anyone can help us warn humanity about what is coming, it will be them. They reached a junction in the tunnel system where Jake had hidden emergency supplies and transportation. Within minutes, They were moving through the abandoned sections of the spaceport on a small maintenance vehicle that made virtually no noise. "Heinrich," Jake said as they traveled through the darkened tunnels. "What if the architect is right? What if biological consciousness really can't survive what's coming?" Heinrich was quiet for a long time before answering. "Then we face that extinction on our own terms, with our minds intact, and our choices our own. The right to make bad decisions is still better than having good decisions made for you, even if those bad decisions lead to the end of everything." Heinrich smiled grimly in the darkness. "Especially then, Mr. Morrison, because if we're going to die, we should die as ourselves, not as digital echoes of what we used to be." As they disappeared into the maze of abandoned tunnels beneath the spaceport, neither man noticed the small tracking device that had attached itself to their vehicle. The council had found them once. They would find them again. And next time, Heinrich and Jake might not be so lucky.